Hi everyone, this is the Orange Vlog group, and we will be beginning our Module 3 Part B responses. So taking a look at our readings and the clips that we had, one thing that really stood out to me was the eugenics project in California, saying that people were deemed unfit to produce. So blaming the victim because of what they were born with definitely is not fair, and sterilizing them against their will. Really taking away those human rights, and they didn't have any say, as well as California not even having any policy changes from there currently. Additionally, in the Lisa Lionheart versus Malibu Stacy clip from The Simpsons, really spoke to me about intersectionality. And so the clip was saying that women were not as equal as men. They were perpetuating the stigma and stereotypes of women. But in the clip, there was only a white woman represented. So there weren't any women identifying women such as trans women or women of color. So definitely that was a very interesting clip that some educators, I would say, that's not representative of like all of our population. So yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So touching base on the blaming the victim question, I did listen to the speech that was shared by Trump in terms of how his rhetoric on immigrants and how flawed it is, and that kind of contributes to the one-sided narrative that was talked about in the TED Talk. And I think that's a form of blaming victims when it comes to policy and such. So in order to combat that as educators in education, we have to first know that these individuals, specifically immigrants that are being talked about in the video from Trump, are being impacted. And in practice, as a student affairs educator, I'm thinking about how I would work with that specific group of students in terms of being inclusive. And one of the things I talked about in my reflection, which I'm going to share here, is building coalitions within the institution to support racially marginalized students, meaning like, building connections or programs like CAMP, which is a migrant service program for these students to have a space within predominantly white institutions. So that's basically my takeaway from the reflection on this.
Yeah, so I was gonna, that makes me think of the Lug reading, and it talks a little bit about queer legal theory and how that can be utilized, especially when thinking about gender and sexual orientation in K through 12 and higher ed, if we could apply it there too. Just talking about how there seems to be a lot more policy based on like non-oppression, and how it's not the same as social justice, and how the role of teachers and administrators needs to be further away from like masculinist like tradition, and more on like educating and understanding impact and things like that, rather than just doing things so that folks can't be told that they're like harassing other people. So in a way that they could utilize that is suggesting to utilize queer legal theory and like policies moving forward.
And then I was also thinking when Janet was talking about like blaming the victim with politics and specifically immigrants, Hall's article specifically focuses on the Black community and how currently kind of like it's framed as if the problem of the Black community is the Black community. And so that's like another form of blaming the victim. And that there's these policies that are being created that don't really recognize empirical research. And so basically at the root of these flawed policies is the belief that there's kind of like the problem that created a need for policies was caused by some action where you can blame someone else. And a lot of these policies are obviously created by white Westerners. And so they view social issues from like a one-sided perspective when they really need to, I think, be critical thinkers and take responsibility for learning things from multiple perspectives. And so I think one way that school leaders can respond to like blaming the victim and to really create an inclusive community is to utilize theory. And a suggestion in the Hall article also talks about social construction theory, which is this, it has like 2 dimensions, and it really gets at what the root of these policies are trying to address, but however they're not addressing. And so in the example of like the Black family, they take this idea that the father is like negligent and unworthy, and then they blame that on the father in the dichotomy of where the child is like really deserving and very sympathetic. And so by doing that and creating this black and white picture, you don't get a full idea of what's actually going on. And so not only educators, but legislators that are creating these policies, they need to take responsibility to understand the framework and the background that these communities are facing. And I think taking an intersectional lens will really help do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, it seems like we had a real cohesive takeaway. Great.